jingle bell rock. A jingle bell swing and jingle bells ring.
Hey, welcome back to part 2 of our Encounter series, A Christmas You Never Knew. We're so glad that you guys are joining us for part 2. Obviously, part 1 wasn't that bad, that you wanted to hear some more as we dive into the book of Matthew again. I was thinking this week, and I know we're kind of in the crunch time of getting gifts and everything, but does anybody have like a funny, like what's your worst gift that you've given to somebody before? Any ideas?
Worst gift we've given?
Yeah.
I think mine, it wasn't an intentional worst gift. Like I thought, like the Trans-Siberian Orchestra, their Christmas.
Yeah.
But my thing was that really only hear the one song. And so I thought, this will be great for my dad. Well, it's like very heavy metal.
Yes.
Yeah. It wasn't, so it wasn't unintentional,
rock.
but I never heard him play it.
That's funny. I like that. That's good. We did this one Christmas where, or one tradition where I would give a potato to somebody in our family because I would just, it was just something random, and like we would draw things on it, and it was then it became this thing that was like, you got the potato this year. So I don't know. It's kind of like goofy and stupid, but I thought it was really funny.
Hopefully
and
not the same potato.
It wasn't the same potato, no. But
very rotten.
I'm notorious for giving like bad gifts to my one brother. I can never think of what to get him, and he's always like, "This is just brutal. Like, don't just give me cash, please."
Don't give me anymore.
I remember, a gift I received, just as we were talking there, my wife, Cindy, and I, when we were dating, went to a family gathering, and her grandparents would always give everybody this little $5 gift sort of thing. So I think I got Stetson or English leather. It was English leather cologne. So I used it to clean like stains off the concrete. No, it was the thought that counted. But when I opened it up, and I'm thinking, the smell, like it would soften saddles. Like it was just really English leather, like pretty rough stuff. So that was not one of the best gifts ever. But
is cash like an acceptable gift for you, or would you be offended?
Depends what currency, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
how much, right? That's.
I have a whole lot of thought involved in it. I guess that's the only thing. But who doesn't like cash?
Yeah, that's right.
Sometimes it's better than nothing. Like one year, my brother gave me deodorant for Christmas, and I was very insulted by that. And I would have preferred,
as well, you should be.
Yes, I would have preferred that he had just gotten me nothing, or like a $5. Like that would have been,
or $4.29 in cash. Oh man,
funny. Awesome. Well,
great.
Megan, if you wanted to just do a quick recap of what we learned from last week, and maybe just intro what we're going to kind of dive into today.
Yeah, so last week we kind of looked at how God's fingerprints were all over the Christmas story, and how Matthew drew attention to all these different prophecies in the Old Testament about the Messiah, and how God was just in control, orchestrating all of these details over centuries to come to fulfillment in one person, in Jesus. And just the ability to understand the context and who this was written for, that these Jewish people would be picking up on all of these prophecies that they'd heard for their whole lives, and recognizing who Jesus is to them. Yeah.
Yeah. We also kind of noticed the kind of these dark undertones, and I think, obviously everyone, well, I don't know, does everyone always look forward to Christmas? We think that way, and marketing, tells us that message, especially, Coke commercials, and it's a big time for all these sort of things. And we anticipate Christmas with such joy and hope, and we make our Christmas lists, and we bake, or we just eat, all this great fudge and cookies and squares and those sort of things. We put up trees and lights and sing, "This is the most wonderful time of the year."
Thought that was back to school time by then.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's become something too, right? I mean, there are so many wonderful things about Christmas, and more importantly than just the Santa and the gifts, obviously, is Jesus, which is what we're talking about. But what about those of us who have experienced tragedy around this time? Or it's the first year without somebody that you loved or cherished. Like, it's not always as happy and merry and cheerful and full of hope. And I think there's definitely been years for me. Christmas is a really hard time. It's a bit of a bitter sweet time, having experienced loss and tragedy. And in those years, there was think we can sometimes get this feeling that it's not okay to not be okay at Christmas. And the one thing that I always found really reassuring is that when we read through the story of Christmas, the original one, it was dark, and it wasn't all happy and great. And I mean, it was full of hope, which is the amazing part as well. But it doesn't negate the fact that it was hard and dark. And so instead of having to just go along and pretend everything's bright and cheery and sunny, we can feel there's almost permission to be not okay in the season. And so, because some of these things, and we talked a little bit about it, like the scandal, Mary, really, I mean, she was a young teenage, unmarried girl. And that, I mean, it's not the best situation to find ourselves in these days, but, go back a few thousand years in a small Jewish community, and that was unheard of. And, I mean, the potential of then Joseph not marrying her would have been very stressful. And in the story as well, it wasn't like everyone was so excited about this baby being born. When you read Herod, and we get a good picture of that as we talked a little bit last week, Herod was very jealous. He was the king. He wasn't exactly the rightful leader at that time. And so the thought and knowing that this Messiah was to be born was a very big threat for him. And he was a very jealous man anyway. If you read a little more about him and his situation, even with his family, he was desperately trying to hold on to that power. And so this brought a lot of darkness, a lot of secrecy with him, and very much death. Like, his intention was to eliminate the threat to his power, which was Jesus. And so we see these, these not so good aspects in the Christmas story as well, contrasting the light, which is something, because we focus on the light, and we're more comfortable with the light, which is so true. And as we read through it last week, we're talking about context. And so another thing to bring into our reading of Scripture is noticing what themes, what words, and what ideas are kind of continuing. And so as we read through, especially like there's the first little bit of Matthew 2, there are a lot of references to the star. 4 times, actually, we read the Magi are coming, they're following the star. And stars, obviously, if it's leading a group of people from a far distance, was a pretty big, bright deal. And so with that was light and Christ. We know Jesus, later in Scripture calls himself the light. But also with the light, again, it doesn't mean that there wasn't suffering. Yeah. And we also know, as we read on through Scripture, that this baby, this Christ, the Messiah, was headed for the cross.
Yeah, I think too, like, it doesn't make a nice Christmas card having all the parts of the Christmas story on there, like the genocide and everything that happened with the fallout of Jesus being born. And it's really hard. I had trouble reading it and trying to shake the notions of all the Hallmark movies and like the greeting cards that you get that looks like this nice cookie cutter Christmas, when in reality it isn't. It isn't this beautiful, really nice and happy story. There are some parts that are very dark, but through that, the light also shines through. And I love that. The 3 guys that come onto the scene that are drawn to this light, the Magi, and it says in the Bible that they were wise men, and we're thinking that they're astronomers because they were obviously looking for signs in the sky, and that's when they saw the star that was over the city. And they would have been around the time and in the context of some Jews that would have been exiled. So this idea of a Messiah kind of character would have kind of been in the back of their minds. And so it's very interesting that these guys, that we don't really know if they're believers or not, what kind of background they have. But either way, they're still drawn to Jesus, which is so unique when so many people are indifferent to him. Herod is so upset that this new Messiah is coming, right? And even the people in Jerusalem are just like indifferent and not enthusiastic about this king, this new Messiah that's coming. But these 3 wise men see this sign and they're drawn to him. And I think it's so important and such a key point that Jesus and God can use anybody, right? Even if he uses these 3 wise men and all throughout
totally
the story.
outsiders, right?
Yeah, and you think about the rest of the outsiders in the story too, right? Like,
Yeah. Another word that comes up repeatedly is from the east, like over and
Right,
over, at least 3 times, which really like signifies they were not from around here.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't like, oh, they just noticed some commotion going on, like they went out of their way, and that Matthew goes to such great extent to bring up that point that these outsiders were the first ones.
Yeah.
Yeah,
As well.
because
come in
what are the
visiting.
odds that they show up? Again, this is like God's fingerprints on this, that at Jesus' birth, he's bringing those outsiders in. And the significance of that Christ came for everyone, and that these outsiders, these magi, could come from so far away and be present celebrating him. I think it just, again, shows God's control and his attention to detail.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that saying, familiarity breeds contempt, and you think of how Israel didn't see Jesus, right? They missed him on so many fronts. And it's so incredible and reassuring to know that God is working in these hearts of people from the east, right? Far away, that we don't know a lot about, yet they were searching. They were looking for something deeper, something bigger. And I love that God was working and stirring hearts, even if his own people missed it in that sense, right? Yeah, pretty powerful.
Yeah, and what's your response to it too? But yeah, it's very interesting. These 3 wise men are crucial to the story and come in, and it's this ray of hope, and they have these 3 different gifts that they give. And you talk about receiving or giving bad gifts. I think for a baby to receive some of these gifts, I think it would be kind of weird. They bring gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And gold, obviously, there's some significance to each one of these gifts, and it's really unique. The Bible is so cool how it has so much significance in every single thing. And the gold obviously is signifying that he is a king. This is a gift that you would give to a king, right? And they don't give it to Mary and Joseph. They actually give it to Jesus, which it says in Matthew, which is so funny. You wouldn't expect to give that to like a baby, right? But they obviously understood and saw that this is the king, this is the Messiah that's born here. And then frankincense also has a representation in itself. It was usually burned as a incense, and it kind of symbolizes the deity aspect of it. And so the kind of worship of a god you would burn during, you'd burn the incense during that. And then myrrh is kind of now we're going back again to the darkness of the story and the foreshadowing. Myrrh is an embalming fluid. And you would think about giving a baby an embalming fluid.
Yeah,
it's
associated with death, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's obviously signifying Jesus' death on the cross as well, and what this baby is actually going to ultimately achieve for us in the long run. So, yeah, it's very unique looking at the meaning of the gifts.
Yeah. What his parents must have thought. I mean, if somebody brings your kid a weird gift, you as a parent are kind of always going, okay, that's practical. Like, what do you say, right? But in this case, I mean, what Mary and Joseph must have thought when these things were laid before their son. It must have been a very unique sort of experience.
Yeah, like I imagine, like with the frankincense, there would be that sense of awe, like you and the gold, like you get it. He is a king and he is to be worshipped. And also now we can fund our escape to Egypt, things like that. But the myrrh would feel like, oh, like there's something coming that I don't want to think about right now.
Yeah, and it's very interesting. Obviously, with the gifts, they're also significant because they help Mary and Joseph flee, and it subsidizes their trip to Egypt when they're fleeing from Herod. So, yeah, they are a very significant part of the story for sure.
Yeah, as we've looked over last week and this week, again, what we're amazed with is how God is in this. And we've seen him orchestrate all these details. We've understood that he's in control. He's sovereign, even in 2020, which is so amazing. Just to finish off, to think about this idea of God with us, the Isaiah 6 story where we see that this child will be born and he shall be called Emmanuel, and how it means God with us. And God had to step in to the story. God had to step into humanity, right? The mess that it was in, the struggle that it was in, but the redemption and the darkness, that we've heard and even still remains today. Yet this light shines in the darkness because God stepped in the person of Christ. And we've even heard in this conversation how he was born, heading to the cross, born with the purpose of ultimately living and demonstrating who God is for us, and then dying for us and being raised to life. And that is, the beauty of the Christmas story is that God is here. He's present. And we hope, certainly that others hear that and understand that message, because that is the proverbial reason for the season. It is about Christ. It is about God showing up, God with us in Emmanuel, his son. And that should hopefully give us some peace, for sure.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this two-part series. And we'll see you next week as we dive into some fun Christmas games. And I hope you guys bring a friend. And we just want to say thank you for encouraging us by showing up every week. And I hope you enjoy your time in your encounter groups as you go into your breakout rooms now.
Green decor, carolers at the door, and that family feeling is